It's not surprising that the White Rock Playhouse in White Rock, British Columbia is a very haunted place. As a class of buildings, theaters are very, very haunted. We know that actors spend a lot of time concentrating. They learn their lines, but they focus on being somebody else on stage for such a concentrated period of time. A number of people believe that their energy stays behind, even long after the play has ended, long after the actors have died.
They were rehearsing a scene last year for a play called An Intimate Affair. It was just the two of them in the building rehearsing, and they heard footsteps above them. The leading lady looked up. She swears that she saw some kind of a male figure up in the rafters. And there's no way that you can get up there without a ladder being on the stage.
Franklin Johnson is well known in White Rock, British Columbia, as a person who was very involved in the local theater. The White Rock Playhouse was his creation. He acted, he directed, he even helped finance the construction of the building. Franklin mortgaged his house and put his heart and soul into the place, but there's very much a reason why he's come back.
Well, after he passed away and his ashes were given to the theater, they were actually used in an urn on stage in several productions. I think for a few years they managed to leave him on stage. And then Mark Burrell, I believe it was, decided that the best way that he would be in the theater would be to spread his ashes underneath the stage in the dirt. And so he's still down here.
My daughter and I were doing a pantomime maybe about 4 years ago. I was directing the show and my daughter was up in the dressing room with the wardrobe lady. They were the only two in the room. My daughter was sitting at a dressing room table and the wardrobe lady, Sandy, well, Sandy looked between the mirrors and looked at my daughter, and there was tears rolling down my daughter's face. So she got up, walked around the makeup table and said, "What's the matter, Elena?" And my daughter turned to her and said, "It's the man in the mirror." There was no one else in the dressing room at the time. My daughter doesn't really remember the incident, but I'm sure Sandy remembers the incident, and I know all of us who were around her during that remember it. It was a rather creepy moment in the dressing room.
I've been with the theater for 2-3 years now, doing tech work, lighting and sound and such. We're rehearsing for this play, and an actress had to go upstairs to get her bottle of water. And she was going up the stairs, and halfway up the stairs, and her figure was coming back down. She hugged the wall as best she could, and as the figure went by, she had this just sheer freezing cold feeling rush through her body, and as if like a wind had passed by her. And this really, really, really scared look in her face.
We constantly hear stories about people being alone in the building and hearing footsteps upstairs. After checking it, there's absolutely nobody in the building, and it's very distinctive footsteps. And it's, you know, somebody wearing a hard-soled shoe, and it's actually quite eerie at times.
The creepiest situation happened to me one weekend when I was cleaning up all by myself, when I heard a gentleman walk onto the stage. I asked him if he needed any help. He didn't reply, and I asked him if he was looking for someone, and still no answer. And then he walked right past me and went out into the lobby. I followed, and a couple seconds later, I was out in the lobby looking around, and there was no one there. Couldn't find anybody, and the doors were all locked up.
When the actors are on stage and then the play's going on, the actors will actually, you know, look in the wings and stop for a second as if they've seen something. It's easy to tell when an actor all of a sudden is off his mark a bit. They tell me afterwards that they looked in the side of the wings and they notice a figure there. No matter how long they look at the figure, they just can't picture who it is. You know, they look away, look back, and then it's gone again. We're doing tech work for a production. This is just before opening night, so I'd come early. I got into the booth, ran through the lighting sequences, brought the lights down for one scene, and when I brought them up, it seemed as if there was someone on stage just for a second, as if I'd caught them and they were caught by surprise. Just like that, they were gone. I thought I was seeing things, but the guy who was running sound beside me looked up and said, "Did you see that?" Yeah. Needless to say, we had an interesting story to tell the crew.
There has been a couple of sightings. I have personally never sighted a ghost myself. I have seen things go missing within a period of 2 minutes from when I've set them down. They've been missing, not turned up till 2-3 days later. Jewelry goes missing quite often. That's about the normal thing that goes on. I was going backstage one night, and there was a wheelchair that was blocking the fire door, and it's a bit of a fire hazard, and I didn't want to get a ticket from the fire marshal, so I moved it, locked the wheels into position, came back into the auditorium to do some final notes. Went backstage, and sure enough, there was the chair in front of the fire doors again. There was nobody in the theater that could have moved it, and so when I went to grab it to move it back into its original position again, as soon as I touched it, I got an icy chill that ran through my body. I think the building is definitely haunted. There's, you know, some of our biggest crew members and stagehands refuse to go upstairs by themselves because it's too spooky up there.
The ghost of Franklin Johnson has come back. He's there quite often. Often on a dark night when people are there by themselves, late at night during rehearsals, his ghost is there. As you can imagine, people aren't expecting to see him. He scares the daylights out of them.
You've got a lot of elements here that are likely to produce a ghost story. You've got the ashes of the founder buried under the stage, and of course, ashes are associated with death. Death is associated with ghosts. So it's not a very long leap to imagine, if you're prone to believe in ghosts, that the ghost of the founder may inhabit this building. Secondly, you've got an acting community, and the world of theater is rife with superstition and fantasy. We all know about the Scottish play Macbeth, where there are all sorts of superstitions about what happens to actors who play the roles, etc., etc. But in general, actors and directors and so forth are more fantasy prone. That's their craft, to use their imaginations and present that to the audience, to be sensitive to their emotions and not question them, but to project them to the audience. So you've got a group of people who are much more likely to be prone to misinterpreting normal stimuli in terms of what their expectation is, that the ghost of the founder may be there, and then the ashes of the founder. What a good mixture to generate ghost stories.
I think Franklin Johnson could be one of the ghosts here, but I think there's a number of spirits here.
My first experience with the ghost that lives in the theater here was in 1989 during a show called Life with Father. It was set in the Victorian era. I noticed that when one of the actors made his exit and went upstairs, that a woman followed him. And then they checked upstairs and she wasn't up there. She just looked like another actor.
One of the apparitions there is a woman. We don't know exactly who she is. Probably somebody who had acted on the stage, or maybe somebody else just associated with the area. A woman wearing a beautiful Victorian gown. She herself was a very beautiful woman. She follows people around the theater, but nobody knows who she is or why she's there.
When you leave the stage after a performance and cross towards the lobby, the building is alive. It holds the energy of the people who've been through it. It's not intimidating in any way, but it certainly is a collector in this auditorium itself. It's a wonderful place. It's a very, very special place.
As long as there are actors on the stage at the White Rock Playhouse, perhaps Franklin Johnson and the lady in the long Victorian gown will be there watching, encouraging, and scaring the daylights out of them. Victoria has many haunted restaurants, and one of those is the 4 Mile House.
My name is Jill. I've been working at 4 Mile for a couple years now, and it was Halloween night, and this is one of the most eerie experiences I have. I'm almost reluctant to tell anyone about this, but it was very slow that night, and there was a Scotch bottle that was on the counter, and it just came up floating in midair past me and landed directly on the bar. And it was as if someone had picked it up and had gently put it there, but no one was there.
My name is Sue. I worked at the 4 Mile for about 5 years, and I've encountered one experience, and that was about 4 years ago. I was training the boss's daughter, and I've taken 3 orders out here, and I was looking at this gentleman by himself, sitting at the table thinking, I gotta get to him, but I can't. It's just too many things going on. I said, Sam, could you please go to table 16? There's a single guy by himself, and I can't get to his order because I'm just too busy. She says, sure, I'll go out there. She went out there. She came back in, and she goes, and what table number was that again? And I said, table 16. She went back out there, and she came back in. She goes, and what did he look like? So I described this person, and she says, you just met Jake. I said, well, who is Jake? And she says, oh, he's the ghost of the 4 Mile.
The 4 Mile House is one of the most historic restaurants and pubs in Victoria. It's named the 4 Mile House because it's 4 miles from downtown Victoria. It was started in the 1850s by Peter Calvert and his wife, Elizabeth. Elizabeth Calvert became well known in the area as a healer. Her Indian women friends would come and they would trade herbs. It was in about 1980 that the Hames, Graham and Wendy, bought the place. They soon discovered how haunted it was. The place was really quite a mess. It was a labor of love and sweat, according to Wendy. And one day, she was on her hands and knees, and she was almost 9 months pregnant as well. And she kept saying to herself as her back ached on this hot, hot day, this had better be worth it. She'd gone over that spot so many times, so she was amazed that there was something still there on the floor. It was something that definitely wasn't there only seconds before. She leaned over and picked it up. It was a 5-cent piece from the United States, and the date was 1867. How it got there, she has no idea. But even though it was only 5 cents, she realized that this was an omen. It was going to be worth it after all. And so they persevered. When Wendy first came to the 4 Mile House, the gardens were in a complete mess. They hadn't been looked after for a long, long time. But at one time, they had been a showplace in the area. And so, without knowing anything at all about gardening, she started to work on them. She didn't really know what she was doing, but from the very beginning, she felt as though her hands were being guided by some unseen force. Perhaps the woman that she saw standing at the window on a number of occasions, the woman believed to be Elizabeth Calvert, the person who had first made the gardens the beautiful places they were. And later, the gardens did turn into a beautiful showplace again. And many people, since then, coming to the parking lot have seen a woman standing at a window, but when they look again, she's not there.
My name is Andrew. I work here at the 4 Mile House Pub. And I've heard some stories here. Sometimes the staff will be in the kitchen and we'll be just talking about stuff, and all of a sudden we'll just be hearing noises coming from the bar area, and we'll come outside and there's no one. Just completely empty, but there's noise. We heard noise going on. It's weird.
The room that is known as the tea room is a place that has at least several ghosts. And Wendy found one herself during the early days of the restaurant. She was doing some waitressing. It was before opening time, so as she passed the door of the tea room, she was quite surprised that there was somebody in there. It was a man, and he was sitting at one of the tables. Her first reaction was, who is that? And she went into the room to investigate. The man was gone. But the chair was ajar where he had been sitting only a few seconds before. She realized that this was probably a ghost. Perplexed, she started talking to the chef. The chef had seen someone in there as well. The chef said, let me tell you what he looks like. And detail for detail, the chef was able to describe that man. He was apparently quite a well-known apparition there in the tea room.
One incident that happened to me, I had to change some things on a menu, so I decided to get some extra menus. And I went upstairs where the menus are stored. After I grabbed the menu, for some strange reason, this door swang open. And out comes this guy, which I found out later after doing a seance that was Jake, and he just ran by me. I mean, literally just ran by. He scared the bejeebers out of me. And that was my experience that I've experienced from there.
The other thing that happened that was completely strange was that I had two glasses together, and I could not get them apart. I tried and I tried. So I put them down. I was gone for maybe a few seconds. I came back, and there they were sitting on the bar counter, about at least 5 inches apart. It was as if something had helped me out. It was really strange.
The employees that work here at the 4 Mile Pub, we decided to talk to Wendy about it, and she decided to have a seance.
Early on, they decided they would try an experiment. Wendy's family often had used a Ouija board, the homemade variety. They would put numbers and letters on pieces of paper and spread them around a table, a wine glass turned upside down, and then the wine glass does the moving, and that's exactly what happened at the 4 Mile House. They made contact with a number of spirits. One of them, he gave his name as Jake. Jake had worked at the 4 Mile House, probably as a stable boy, many, many years before. And Jake had met an untimely end. He had been murdered. However, the people that owned the place had some influence. They wanted to cover this up, and so Jake's murder never really was fully investigated. Through the Ouija board, a lot of information of a very positive nature can come forward.
Well, the seances are interesting social settings because you have a group of people all gathered together deliberately to suspend their disbelief and to try to come to have contact with some disembodied spirit. And so because that's the purpose of the whole thing, they're bent on interpreting any kind of, in quotes, information as coming from a ghost. And in some seances, people use wine glasses or Ouija boards or whatever in the hope that the ghost or the spirit will move them. And very often this involves some contact by the humans around the table. People can unconsciously move objects or move wine glasses, and if you have a number of letters arranged around the table, spell out things, being quite unaware they're deliberately doing this. And they attribute the movement to the ghost. And so all they end up getting when the words are spelled out is something they either already knew or something they've already fantasized and imagined. But because they're unaware of these movements that are being caused by they themselves, they become more convinced than ever that the ghost is real.
At the 4 Mile, there's this stained glass window of a lady wearing a beautiful white flowing dress, and she's the White Lady of April Point.
Apparently she was a woman staying in the 4 Mile House with the Calverts, and her husband was a sea captain. She would go out every day waiting for his ship to come in. And then she heard, of course, that he would never come home. He'd been lost at sea. Her ghost still returns to April Point, a small point of land jutting into Esquimalt Harbor very close to the 4 Mile House. She's seen there on dark winter evenings, a white shimmering form on April Point.
It's quite a sad story because this lady here over the last 100 years has been looking out to sea, waiting for her man to return home. I mean, she must have really loved him.
Wendy and Graham have come to realize that the spirits of the 4 Mile House are friendly. It's a place where people can dine and have a drink in the ambience of the 1850s and 1860s while enjoying the company of people who lived then and perhaps even earlier as well. The Princess Mary Restaurant Vessel on dry land became a very popular place through the 1950s and 1960s. The whole place is very haunted. Not unusual, really, because ships can be very haunted places.
A waitress that used to work here, she was heading up to the storage room, which used to be the wheelhouse when this was a boat. And she was getting some stuff for the kitchen, and she looked up to the rafters and she saw a woman hanging there. And the woman opened her eyes and looked at her, and it totally freaked her out. So she looked away, and then when she looked back, the woman was gone. So she brushed it off, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her. The exact same woman that she saw hanging there walked past her in the hallway. I believe it's haunted. There's several people that have died on the ship, and I don't think they're ready to go anywhere soon. I believe this is their home.
There seems to be something about one of the components of the old ship itself, perhaps the Venezuelan oil tanker. It's said that the wife of a former captain had committed suicide by hanging herself in the old wheelhouse.
Today, we boast that we have a resident ghost that comes around and does different things around the Princess Mary. Some of the examples are rattling dishes, footsteps when there's nobody there, and many different little things that go on, and we just take it for granted that there's a female ghost around and she's friendly, and we live with her on a day-to-day basis.
The Princess Mary is a favorite ship in Victoria. It was a coastal steamer built in Scotland. It arrived in Victoria just before World War I. A very well-known sight until the early 1950s when the ship needed lots of repairs. It was being scrapped at Capital Iron in downtown Victoria, and directly across the harbor, Harold Elworthy operated Island Tug and Barge. Elworthy needed a place for his staff in the growing business to have coffee on their lunch breaks, and he saw the saloon as being a pretty good place. And as time went on, their business expanded and they needed to add more. And so part of a wooden ferry was brought in and added to the old ship. And then a Venezuelan oil tanker became part of it as well.
A couple of the other things that have happened on the Princess Mary when it was in service was there was 2 sailors that had hung themselves also in 2 cabins, and 2 people had drowned that we have know of, and we have them documented.
Mr. Lang and I were working upstairs. It used to be the wheelhouse.
It was approximately 10:30 at night, and we were taking inventory, and we had locked up the rest of the ship, and there was nobody else in the building.
All of a sudden, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. We both turned to each other and said, "Did you hear that?" And we both got up, walked outside, out the room, no one in sight. But I still, to this day, remember those footsteps.
Well, the Princess Mary restaurant story is an interesting one. Of course, you got all the elements here. Ships have often been associated with hauntings and ghost stories. And then the legend, of course, of the woman who hung herself. All these elements provide a good setting for ghost stories. Now, ghost stories often come about because people perceive things late at night, and they like to think that perhaps ghosts only come out after dark. But what happens is that after dark, we become much more anxious. We depend very much on visual stimulation for our sense of security in the world. And in the dark, we can't obviously have the same sense of security we have when the lights are on. So even in semi-darkness, we're much more likely to be a little bit anxious, a little bit more prone to anxiety, and certainly more prone to misinterpret stimuli, whether it's the creaking of pipes or whatever, as being something sinister, something that justifies the anxiety we're feeling. In the context of a place that's supposedly haunted, our brains quickly jump to, that's the ghost.
Adjacent to the new second-floor banquet room is an old area, part of the old Venezuelan oil tanker. It's used now for storage, and only staff have access to it. One of the servers for a club luncheon one day was walking through that storage room.
And as I walked up to the upper level, there was a man in the back. And I was in a hurry, so I didn't pay too much attention. And then I stopped him and said, there was a man there. What is he doing out there? Because it's a service area, nobody goes there. So I turned back and I said, excuse me, can I help you? And he was gone. I went back afterwards, double-checked. No one was in the room, and it's a mystery.
The kitchen seems to be a very haunted place as well. In fact, that's where most of the hauntings take place in the Princess Mary. At first, it was just small things. The staff began to notice the kitchen utensils suddenly going missing. They appear at the end of the day exactly as they were once located, but on the opposite side of the room. No one had done it, and if that happened just once or twice, it might be written off as a strange quirk, but it happens all the time. The lady who washes dishes, who's been there for a number of years, says that sometimes when she steps away just for a moment with the dishes piled up, she comes back and discovers that they're all done. And it happens very often.
Myself and another chap, Henry, were working in the kitchen. We had noticed that our dishwasher had left, so there was nobody else in the kitchen. It was just Henry and I. We seen an escargot dish fly off 10 to 12 feet against the convection oven on the other side. So even if it fell off the shelf, it would never get that momentum. So we both stood there in awe in the middle of this big rush, and we could not believe our eyes. We were heading out home, and we walked down into the large banquet room that we have at the Princess Mary. And I looked across to see a white streak run down through the original part of the ship, and then it disappeared. So needless to say, we were very upset and very scary at that event.
The most unusual experience, I would say, was on an afternoon, more busy than usual. I was serving quite a few tables, and I had a tray full of coffee on my plate. And as I was walking through the restaurant, one of the cups literally jumped up like there was a spring underneath it and spun through the air. It landed straight on the ground, right side up, without spilling a drop. There was nothing on me, nothing on my tray. The carpet was dry. It was unbelievable.
Have passengers from days gone by return to the old ship just for one last ride? Or is it the wife of the captain of the Venezuelan oil tanker, now an addition to the old restaurant vessel? There's so many things that make the ship haunted. And even the new parts seem to attract ghosts. I think the Princess Mary will be haunted for a very long time.
The Halifax Club has remained a landmark in Halifax for many years. It is the site of a private gentleman's club. It is where high society hangs its hat. And it also is a place that is reputed to be haunted.
The club was established in 1862 by 15 influential and wealthy men in Halifax. The men had very close ties with Mother England. The city needed a grand ballroom and a place to hold special dinners. They decided to form the club, build the clubhouse. The first story involves the manager of the club. The first manager was here at the Halifax Club in 1864. And in 1870, he shocked everyone by standing up in front of the members, stabbing himself repeatedly. The reason why we think this is a potential for haunting, obviously there was a level of insanity, and this is one of the only recorded deaths here at the club.
The untimely death of the general manager at his own hands has resulted in his spirit remaining at the scene of his death. He is now a prisoner of the famous Halifax Club. One hot spot of activity in the club is near the cloakroom on the first floor of the building. One employee actually experienced an ice-cold feeling standing near the cloakroom and sensed a really evil presence near her. It was a spine-tingling encounter. Although this employee still works at the club, she's not at all comfortable going near the cloakroom area on the first floor of the building.
The second story involves one of our members being involved with the most popular lady of the evening here in Halifax.
One night, a member of the club went into Halifax for some entertainment. He joined the company of another woman, possibly a lady of the night. Unfortunately for this gentleman, he died while he was in bed with his company.
He had a heart attack while with her, and he was married. She wanted to avoid scandal, so she contacted the club.
His companions and members of the club wanted to save his poor reputation. Thereby, they went and retrieved the body and brought the body back and laid it out on the front steps of the club. They wanted it to make it seem like the poor chap had died while walking out the front door. And since that time, this gentleman, who seems to be quite misplaced in history, remains haunting the Gentlemen's Club.
So the Halifax Club haunting, I suppose, has all the elements of the usual ghost story. You have a prestigious old building, and perhaps the people in this particular club want to have a ghost. You know, a lot of the old British clubs had ghosts, and perhaps there's a deliberate effort to create a legend of a ghost. I don't know. But the history of this particular ghost, the man dragged to the front steps after he had died in the company of a prostitute, is a rather vague one. Did that actually happen or not? Was that made up to support the ghost story? Is the ghost really kind of a club mascot? Did it start out as a hoax that later on came to be believed by generations of members? It's hard to say. But what you have here, very vague story to back up the notion that there should be a ghost there, and then, of course, all the possibility in the world to have people imagine a ghost once they've learned the story.
There are 7 rooms at the Halifax Club, all named after predominant or founding members of the club. 3 behind me, the Kenny, Tobin, and Kennard, were named after founding members.
The Halifax Club had quite a famous member at one time. His name was Kennard. Kennard owned shipping lines in Halifax, and in fact, it was Kennard's company who built the infamous Titanic. Near the Halifax Club is actually the site or cemetery of the victims of that disaster. It's quite possible the activity in the cemetery is a result of these poor souls that are actually wanting to go home. And no doubt, these victims, on occasion, might be going looking for the man responsible for building that ship. And what better place to look for him than the Halifax Club?
Some of the haunting type scenarios that have happened here at the club have involved chandeliers swinging.
One waitress in particular heard one day the sound of glasses banging together, and when she looked around to see what was going on, she realized that the sound of glass was actually the chandelier above her swinging back and forth on its own. Now, this has occurred many times in the dining rooms, and on one particular occasion, not one chandelier, but many chandeliers were swinging back and forth at the same time. Obviously, the general manager never left the dining room.
There has been a staff member who's come to me and said, I get this eerie chill over my body when locking up.
Waiters and waitresses working in the club have also reported hearing whispers and sensing someone right beside them. And yet when they turn around, no one is there, and there was no one there to call their name. We do know that we possibly may have 2 spirits haunting the Halifax Club. It could be the gentleman member or the general manager. But whoever it is, we do know that they have taken out an eternal membership in the Halifax Club. The historic Bytown Museum stands as a monument to the workers who constructed the Rideau Canal. Workers were pushed to work extremely hard, long hours, and their health was not necessarily important to the supervisors of the canal. They had a timeline, and that's what they followed. Death did not stop the construction of the Rideau Canal. The exhibits displaying the harsh conditions the workers experienced while building the canal may be one reason that attracts the spirits to the building. Today, stories are told of an array of paranormal activity happening in the building. For example, lights turn off and on, objects are moved, and people report seeing or feeling a presence in the building.
I've been working as the museum director for four years. You cannot work in this building without having some paranormal experiences. One of the strangest events, because when I first started working here, I was a bit of a skeptic. And Hélène, who works here, said that the playing cards in one of our displays, the parlor display, in the By parlor, she said they would move. And I said, yes, 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 I'm sure it's the visitors. So finally, this went on for a while, and she said, all right, when we leave, before we leave tonight, you place the cards in any way that you want. And since the two of us drove to work together, we knew that nobody else would be in the building. And there are no breezes that can move cards. The building is sealed because we are a museum. So the very next morning, I came upstairs first, and the playing cards were on the floor. They weren't only rearranged on the table, they were on the floor to sort of make a point. And that's sort of when I started to think, okay, there's something to the spirit thing.
Duncan McNabb is believed to be one of the spirits inhabiting the museum. McNabb was a supervisor of the Rideau Canal and worked out of this building. Current employees of the museum admit that if Duncan's name is mentioned, the lights may flicker or the computers in the building go amok.
On one of the main computers in the gift shop, occasionally when the name Duncan McNabb is mentioned, it has been known that this computer would turn off and then reboot itself and turn back on. Last summer when I was here in the gift shop, I was speaking to one of the staff here at the museum. When I mentioned the name Duncan McNabb, the computer did shut down and rebooted, but this time, instead of just restarting itself, it started to print out text on the screen. Again and again, it printed the words, Lieutenant Colonel John By, Lieutenant Colonel John By. Some of the staff here have guessed that the reason the computer printed those words is that it was a message from the spirit trying to tell us, perhaps, that we had the person wrong, perhaps that it wasn't Duncan McNabb, but that it was Colonel By, or that perhaps there's more than one ghost here at the museum.
One of the major areas of activity in the building is the gift shop. People report objects being moved on their own, doors refuse to be open, and lights often flicker on their own.
My name is Alan. I've worked here at the Bytown Museum for about 3 years, and in that time I've seen and I've heard some strange things. I work in the gift shop, and one of the responsibilities is to arrange the display cases, and I'd arranged some ceramic bears just prior to me leaving that evening. When I came in and opened up the shop at 7 o'clock the following morning, I noticed that 2 of the bears from the display case were on the floor. I picked them up and went back to the display case, then noticing that the other bears in the case had been turned upside down, but the case was locked. There was no way that that could have happened. And then realized that I had to turn the alarm off. So I rushed over to the control panel, but when I reached to turn off the alarm, something shoved me hard against the wall. I reached around, I ran over and turned on the lights, but there was nothing there. I can't explain it. I don't know what happened, but it scared me pretty fierce.
Perhaps the most convincing encounter to happen here at the museum happened a couple of falls ago to myself and some of my staff. We were having a staff party here at the museum and we decided to watch some movies and spend the night, I guess, telling some tales and spooking each other out. And afterwards, we decided to go downstairs to close up. We went down to the first floor to the gift shop, and before we left, I had to set the alarms and the motion detectors. when all of a sudden the door started to vibrate. A little at first, and then it shook violently and very heavily, as though somebody on the other side were pushing the door and banging on it, trying to get out. I was absolutely terrified. I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move. When we later got outside, I asked them what they'd seen, and in fact, they had not seen the door shaking at all. They had heard were a set of heavy footsteps crossing the floor above them, walking along right towards the spot where they were standing. All of us were quite convinced by this experience, and ever since then we felt that it's one of the more haunted buildings here in Ottawa.
One unusual exhibit that draws a lot of attention, not only from employees but also visitors to the museum, is the cast hand of Thomas D'Arcy McGee, one of the Fathers of Confederation. D'Arcy McGee was shot down in cold blood by Patrick Wayland one evening in Ottawa. Since McGee was shot in the face, instead of making a cast of his facial features, the officials decided to make a cast of his hand. One time, a staff employee found that the case had been removed covering the cast hand. It was seated beside the stand. The employee went to handle the cast hand of D'Arcy McGee and couldn't believe how ice cold it felt. She was shocked. The Bytown Museum is a good example of spirit imprinting, and that is the energy that is surrounded by the objects. When an object or a possession of a person is placed on exhibit after they die, there's a good possibility that they may be connected to that object. So, Bytown Museum, like many other museums throughout the country, all experience this similar activity around artifacts.
So when we see old objects or artifacts or in old buildings, we tend to be filled with some sense of awe. Wouldn't attract any attention at all in Europe, where it would be almost like yesterday to say something was built 300 years ago. We feel this awe, and we have two directions in which we can go. We can use that awe as a springboard to explore the history of the objects or the building, to find out what they really represent, what the true story is behind them, and learn a great deal about the culture that produced them. Or we can simply focus in on something that is sort of like mental candy, mental popcorn, the ghost stories, the hauntings, the sensational aspect of it that in all likelihood isn't true to begin with. And even if it were true, it's so minor and so inconsequential that for it to divert us from a study of the larger history of these objects, that's kind of sad. There's no evidence that there are ghosts. There's no evidence that objects are associated to disembodied spirits. But there's lots of evidence, we take this as a given, that objects, carvings, and so forth were made by real people sometime in the past, and they can guide us to not only understanding those people at that time, but also help inform us about people in general, and perhaps we'll learn something about ourselves.
People say, "Are you afraid working in this building?" And I recall something my father told me when I was very, very young, that we had no reason to fear the dead, that they would never hurt you, that it was the living that would get you every time. And working in this building, those words have often come back to me.
On one beautiful clear night, a couple was relaxing around a campfire. The area was very secluded, so they were surprised to see a man walking towards them. The man was dressed oddly, as if he were in clothing from another time. The figure continued to walk toward them. And when the man reached the edge of the fire, he did not stop, but he walked straight through the campfire as if it weren't there. He simply kept walking, ignoring the flames and the people. The couple ran for their car, terrified by the encounter. New River Beach is a beautiful seacoast community in New Brunswick. There are several tales of hauntings on or around New River Beach. A lost sailor who beckons people, a beautiful woman who is glimpsed on the rocky cliffs, and the ghosts who haunt a nearby mansion called the Night House. All of these hauntings are connected to the tragic sinking of the ship Genii.
Now, the Genii seem to have been ill-fated from the beginning. The plan was to launch the ship on a Friday, which was considered the worst day to do so. The ship had been under construction for 3 building seasons, which was also considered bad luck, and when it was finally slid down the ways, the ship landed on its side instead of a proper entry into the water. Nonetheless, the ship was fitted out in St. Andrews, taken on a trial run around the island of Grand Manan. Everything seemed to be okay, and off they went to New River Beach and the night mill where they were to load deals. When they sailed up the bay in December of 1868 and arrived off New River Island, they had on board 4 sailors, or 4 experienced seamen, and 7 men from Mascarene whose job was to unload the ballast stone and load the deals. They had no experience as sailors at all, and this may have led to the tragedy that was to follow. After they had unloaded the ballast, they went into Haggerty's Cove to have a few drinks. The pilot, the man who knew the waters the best, had a little too much to drink and stayed in Haggerty's Cove for the night. But the 11 men, their captain, went back aboard the ship. It was a calm evening, but it wasn't to stay that way for this tremendous gale that was blowing up the coast of Maine and entering the Bay of Fundy. When it struck the ship, it struck with a vengeance. With only 4 experienced men aboard, it flipped over in the storm and dragged into the cove by Knight's Mill. There, 4 men were found the next morning in the cove. The rest of the men, they were found along the shore of New River Beach within the next day or 2. The Genii, when it came ashore, it was just in front of the Knight house. And this was where the first 4 bodies were brought up so that the coroner could come from St. George and examine the bodies. One body, though, did not show up for about 6 weeks later. That was the body of John Rioux. And his body drifted in the opposite direction of tides and winds and ended up at what they called at that time Barnabas Point. Today, that particular area is called Dead Man's Cove.
Almost immediately, stories began to be told about a ragged sailor who had been seen wandering the beach. Those who saw him claimed that he called out and beckoned them to come closer, but few did. The sailor seemed confused, as if he didn't know how he had come to be there. Since the sailor was seen at Dead Man's Cove, people decided he must be John Rioux, the sailor whose body washed up on shore. These stories have continued to the present day.
I always wondered about the story. Then last winter, doing some research, I came across the actual finding of the body of John Rioux in Barnabas Head, or on Barnabas Head, in this cove that at that time had no name and which is now known as Dead Man's Cove. I concluded from this that this story of John had been in the community as a folk tale or folklore for many, many years, and that there was, in fact, some substance to that story.
One woman submitted a very frightening report to the local police department. She was driving past New River Beach when she saw a man standing in the road. He seemed to appear out of nowhere. She slammed on her brakes, but was certain she had hit him. She ran from the car to see if he was injured, but there was nobody there. The van was undamaged, and the police later found no sign of anyone. The woman was very frightened and embarrassed. Ironically, this would not be her last encounter with the ghosts of New River Beach. There's another ghost that walks the beach at New River. The same woman who had the vehicle encounter went to the shore one day. She saw a woman step out onto the high rocks about 20 yards away. The rocks are very treacherous, and she was concerned that the woman might jump, as she seemed very distraught. The woman turned toward her, and the moment they made eye contact, the mysterious woman vanished. There have been multiple encounters with this mystery woman, who always seems to be glimpsed on the high cliffs. One witness had gone down to the shore to meet a friend of his when he glimpsed the woman standing on the high rocks. Fearing that the woman might be suicidal, he called to her and ran to stop her.
Hey! Hey! Hey!
His friend on the other side of the rocks heard the yelling and looked up and clearly saw the woman. He ran to help her. When the first man got to the top, he saw the woman vanish. He thought she must have jumped, but there was no sign of her on the rocks below. Both men had seen the same thing, but there was nobody there. There is one possible explanation. Records in the area indicate that the wife of one of the Genai's crew was shattered by the loss. She spent her days staring out into the ocean, hoping that he would return, even though he had been buried months ago. Eventually, her sadness became too much for her to bear, and she climbed these very rocks and threw herself off into the sea.
Well, you got all the ingredients here for a great ghost story. A ship that goes down with all hands on board, bodies washed onto the shore, one body missing. What could have happened to that body? That body eventually sweeps up on shore as well. Then you've got a windswept beach, and over the course of time, lots of opportunity for people to either imagine ghostly figures walking down the beach at night because they're feeling kind of nervous and expecting ghosts, or perhaps to see some stranger walking down the beach and interpret this as the ghost of the dead sailor or the dead sailor's wife or lover.
The beach is not the only haunted spot. Atop the cliffs is the Night House, where the crew of the Genai was laid out. The house has remained haunted since that tragic day.
I'm Phyllis Farquharson, and I moved into this house back in 1984. It was known as the Night House at that time.
Phyllis recalled one very unusual experience. She had come home from work early and was exhausted. There were heavy curtains throughout the house, used to keep out the draft, but it was a warm day, so she left them open. She hung her coat up and left the closet door open to air and went upstairs. She was on the phone when she heard noises downstairs. She clearly heard the sound of curtains being pulled shut and of a heavy door slamming. She asked her friend to stay on the line and went downstairs to investigate. As she came down the stairs, the noises stopped, and the house became completely silent. She discovered that the closet door had been slammed shut, and that the curtains had been pulled closed. She was the only person in the house. Doors opening and closing were very common phenomena. Often Phyllis would be upstairs and would hear the doors continuously slamming shut. The noise would stop the instant somebody came down the stairs.
Things would move around in the house, too. You'd put something down and you'd go back for it and it wouldn't be there.
Certain objects seemed to attract the ghost at the Night House, especially antiques. Phyllis was brushing her hair with an antique brush she had been given. She set the brush down and left the room for a moment. As she was walking down the hall, she felt as if she were being watched, just a feeling, a presence near her. She turned back to her room and found that the brush had been moved from the dresser to the bed. This was not the first time that this had happened. The new owners of the Night House have not had any ghostly experiences. Maybe the renovation of the Night House has allowed the ghosts of the genii to move on. New River Beach is a very unique ghost story where one tragic event has led to 3 documented hauntings. Whether it is the Lost Sailor, or the Lady on the Cliff, or the hauntings of the Night House, there are too many reports to dismiss the tales of New Brunswick's most haunted beach.
Bevan House, a beautiful home of the early 1930s, is now a landmark heritage building in Nanaimo. It's also one of the most haunted places on mid-Vancouver Island. In the basement of Bevan House is a storage area, a large room where they store boxes of pamphlets and brochures. Staff don't like going down there because when they do, often they hear heavy thumping overhead, as if somebody's dropping a very, very heavy object in the room directly overhead. Of course, no one is ever there. And one lady who heard these sounds for the first time ran out. She wouldn't come back into the building until she was assured that there was nothing there. Of course, there never is anything that people can see. Frank Bevan was born in New Zealand and arrived in North America and did very well in the lumber business. Ended up in Nanaimo, British Columbia. And in the 1930s, he'd done so well, he decided to buy a huge estate just north of town, and he built a fabulous house, but in the early 1950s, he died. And after that, the house was sold, and by the mid-1990s, it was in such bad repair, they were going to tear it down until the heritage people got a hold of it, and they decided it was worth saving. And so they did. They restored the outside of it, and the inside was converted to offices. Now, Bevan House is the home to Tourism Nanaimo. During the 1990s, a preschool used the Bevan House, and a very interesting phenomenon took place. Although adults never saw the apparition, many of the children in the preschool did.
Well, one of the interesting happenings that's happened in the house was in the mid-'80s, when the house was used as primarily as a daycare center and an after-school center. One of the leaders that had been working here for some time had one of the little boys come into the kitchen where the children were playing and coloring and such, and had asked where the little boy was. And he said that he was outside playing with the little boy with the red ball. She asked which boy that he was talking about, as the children were all accounted for. She asked him to draw a picture of the little boy. And she was shocked to see that it was the same picture that had been drawn by another 4-year-old 4 years earlier.
At the time of the preschool, only the children had seen the apparition of the child with the white gown and the red ball. But many years later, one of the former adult employees of the preschool was in the building and happened to see something out of the corner of her eye, and then she saw a child with a white gown and a red ball running up the stairs. She remembered the stories that the children had told her, and she ran up the stairs looking for it, but absolutely no one was there. This is the first instance we know of a validation of what those children had seen many years ago. It didn't take long before people realized that this was probably one of the children of the Bevan's Chinese servant.
It's important to understand that children, young children, are very poor at reality testing. They literally cannot tell the difference sometimes between what's fantasy, what's imagination on the one hand, what's real on the other. Lots of children have imaginary friends. But the young child actually believes and claims to be able to see the imaginary friend. It's all part of normal development. Gradually, the child learns to tell the difference between fantasy and reality. If adults start to take this seriously, they may either think the child has some kind of mental disturbance, which isn't the case, or that there's literally some kind of ghost out there that the child sees. So one of the possibilities is that the suggestible teacher or adult says the child has seen something, the child has seen a ghost, forgetting that the child may have been fantasizing or forgetting that there may have been some normal explanation for this. Over time, naturally, then as people start to take this story seriously, all sorts of things tend to confirm it. It becomes impossible to dissuade people about it. They're convinced that they've had first-hand experience with the little boy and the red ball.
Another interesting story was a while ago, some of our staff were working in an office here, and our offices have French doors in them that, as you'd expect to find in an old building of this kind. And all of a sudden they saw a flash, and something hit the French doors with such force that it damaged the lead beading in the door. And they couldn't find what it was that hit the door. They never found, and there was nobody else in the building at the time. So just the staff, they presumed that the little boy with the red ball was playing with his ball and just wanted a little bit of company that day.
The basement of Bevan House is very haunted, particularly the room where the servant family had lived. That's where the child that played with the red ball had lived and apparently still wanders, because people see things down there, out of the corner of their eye, shadowy shapes. Some have said they have seen the child with the red ball just wandering in and out of the rooms in the basement of Bevan House. People hear footsteps running up and down the stairs at Bevan House. Although some people just pass this off, some people can't. They're very unnerved by this.
We've had some interesting experiences, the people that work here. A little while ago, my bookkeeper was working away in her office, and all of a sudden I heard this little ooh sound. What the heck? Get up out of my desk and walk over to where she is. And she's coming out of the office just as I'm meeting her. And she says, there's this little yellow powder all over everything coming from the ceiling. And I say, yeah, right, there's nothing that can come from the ceiling. And so walked into her office, and sure enough, the desk is covered with this little yellow powder. So we dusted it off, and she went back to work. I went back to my office, and I no sooner got back to my office and the same thing, oh, this sound. But as soon as I walked into her office, the powder shower, as it will, stopped. We did this another time, so 3 times the little powder fell from the ceiling.
When Frank Bevan built his house, he put all the most modern fixtures inside, including beautiful ornate doorknobs. They're still there. They're very difficult to get off when people have purposely tried to take them off, and yet there's something very strange about those doorknobs, because when people are going to open the doors, the doorknobs just pull off in their hands.
Every spring, several of them fall off. And again, we don't know why they fall off, but they do, and they get screwed back on, and we check that they're tight, and everything is fine indeed until the next spring. It may be a whimsical ghost playing with us here.
If you believe that ghosts are inhabiting your building, you can come to attribute anything to them. If a doorknob doesn't work or it falls off, that's the ghost. Of course, if you're in an old building and the doorknobs are old, they're going to fall off from time to time anyway. And so anytime they fall off or anytime a door lock jams, you can take that as evidence of the ghost. It's interesting that people often see patterns in time. So people may say, oh yes, this happens more at one time of the year than another. If people keep records of when doorknobs fall off, I would be quite certain they'll find that the pattern that they perceive is not the real pattern that's there.
On one occasion, there was an event one evening at Bevan House, and the following morning, early, a staff member came in. She was washing some dishes in the downstairs kitchen, and she wondered what was going on upstairs. Laughter, noises, teacups rattling. It sounded like somebody was having a great time, a tea party, she thought. Well, shortly, a staff member came in and joined her, and she said, what's going on upstairs? She hadn't had time to go and check herself. He said, there's nobody upstairs. We're here alone in the building. Very modern ghostly phenomenon is voicemail. It seems that the ghosts at Bevan House like to play with the voicemail.
At Halloween last year, we had an event here, and we had hundreds and hundreds of children coming to Bevan House to enjoy a pretty spooky experience. And we had a spooky experience of our own that night. I was working during the evening, and my office door was closed. But when I left, I thought, well, there were still a few people around, so we should leave the office looking a little bit in keeping with the event.
And as part of the effect, he left his phone dangling off the hook. No one bothered to put it back that evening, so the phone was completely engaged all evening. When he went in the next morning, he put it back on and just happened to listen. There was a voicemail message. Obviously, no one could have called in the night before, but there, on the voicemail, was the sound of thumping, thumping. It was really quite unnerving. And also, noises, laughter, people running, almost like children had been playing in the building. A female employee one morning came in and listened to her voicemail messages at Bevan House, and she was amazed to hear thumping, thumping, thumping. On the voicemail, it went on for some time, just as though somebody had been walking through the entire house during the night, but somehow it was recorded on the voicemail. She was really quite frightened. The voicemail at Bevan House is very haunted. On the second floor of Bevan House, where the family's bedrooms were, people have seen the form of a very attractive woman.
One of the housemates tells a story that happened a couple of years ago to him. He was leaving his office, just locking up, and he turned around. Just out of the corner of his eye, he saw a woman standing at the doorway to our office, and he turned around completely to see who it was, and of course there was no one there.
And they don't know who she is. Some have speculated it could be Mrs. Bevan herself. Bevan House is a landmark heritage building in Nanaimo, and it's had an interesting history with lots of ghosts. A small child, the ghost of a beautiful woman, footsteps, and an array of other things. It's one of the most haunted places on mid-Vancouver Island.
One of the most fascinating mysteries across Canada is its lake monsters. Whether we're talking about Ogopogo and Lake Okanagan or Champ and Lake Champlain, lake monsters are a definite part of Canada's mysteries. And Quebec has its own lake monster, Memphrey, in Lake Memphremagog. The 35-foot Memphrey has been documented throughout history. However, a local historian and researcher, Jacques Boisvert, has collected data, drawings, videos, photographs, and eyewitness accounts to further attest to the proof of the existence of the serpent that they call Memphrey, who resides in the waters of Lake Memphremagog, Quebec.
Bonjour les amis, my name is Jacques Boisvert. I'm from Magog. I'm a own resident of this place, been here all my life, and we're here today to talk to you about the sea creatures called the sea serpent of Lake Memphremagog by the name of Memphrey. The gentleman, his name is Gérard Charland. He lives in Ormerville, not far from here. And he phoned me up someday and he came to my office, and boy, I mean, was he excited. He said, I saw something yesterday. I said, what have you seen? Well, he said, I was fishing. I was near the Saint-Benoît-du-Lac, the abbey there. And he said, suddenly I saw on my sonar, I saw something big, and I turned around and I saw something coming out of the water. Not only said that we saw it, but we recorded on a chart of his sonar. This is what he saw was coming up, and this is the same thing coming down here. And he explained that it came up on surface and that he could see it.
Photos and video are another example of the fleeting evidence that plague the world of the paranormal, especially when investigating a creature such as a lake monster. Videos are shaky, photographs are blurry. To the believer, it's evidence. To the skeptic, it's nothing else but a log in the water or a moose in the middle of a lake.
Sometimes it's more exciting. People will want to see a lake monster, and they'll look for it, and they'll find something that satisfies that craving because it makes it exciting. But also basic perception is very important. I talked to an experienced bird watcher who told me that he was at Point Pelee Park with a whole bunch of other bird watchers, people who had long experience. And he saw a particular bird that wasn't supposed to be in Canada ever. And he saw it from a distance through binoculars. And other people came and they watched it. And they noted down what it was. I don't remember what the kind of bird it was. But he said as it got closer and closer and closer, they realized it was a Cessna aircraft. So when experienced bird watchers can be fooled in seeing an airplane as a bird, it's not hard to understand how inexperienced watchers can interpret a log or a shadow or something on a lake as a sea monster. And let's face it, it'd be exciting to see one. If there is a sea monster, I'd love to see it. So if I'm walking along the shores of Lake Memphremagog, for example, and if I really think that sea monsters exist, boy, I'd sure like to get one, get a picture of one, see one. That makes me all the more prone to suggestibility.
I was amazed a few years ago when this woman that lives in Toronto phoned me up and says that she had a video of something she had witnessed not far from where I live, near the Three Sisters Island.
She had a video camera and captured what might be the best evidence of Memphrey to date. She went to Jacques and showed him the video. The tape was studied extensively, and there is no sign of fraud or any tampering with the image whatsoever. The woman sought no financial gain from the tape and did not attempt to gain any publicity from it. This tape stands as the best evidence that there actually is a lake monster in Quebec's Lake Memphremagog, known as Memphrey.
We have over 200 sightings right now. Most of what the people would tell me would say, armed creature, snake-like, very big. They always speak about between 20 to 30 feet. And it's always seen when the lake is calm.
One of the most frustrating parts about investigating and researching a phenomenon is lack of evidence. For example, lake monsters. If they exist, how come we've never found one of their carcasses? It's very simple. It sinks to the bottom. However, the scientific community will not accept the existence of a lake monster or Sasquatch without the proof of its existence being its carcass. Some glimpses of dead creatures have actually been seen. For example, the carcass that was brought aboard a Japanese trawler. Well, unfortunately, before the scientific community could actually do its investigation on this crucial piece of evidence, because it smelled, it was released and turned back into the sea.
I don't take any hearsay, will say, sightings. If people tell me something, they have to sign a paper. Otherwise, I'm not interested in taking these sightings.
Remember the story of the coelacanth that had been thought to have been extinct for millions of years, that was recently caught off the shores of India. The coelacanth had never been caught, photographed, and yet this scientist, walking through a market in India, recognized it. Thus, an unsolved mystery of past times has been solved. And maybe one day, people like Jacques Boisvert and his investigation will come up with the clue that will prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that Canada's lake monsters really do exist.
There's quite a famous house situated in White Rock, British Columbia. It is the home of a well-known artist by the name of John Andretti. John is quite a famous artist. Famous people throughout North America have acquired his work. There's one other unusual side to John. John Andretti lives in a haunted house. John's experienced some very unusual activity in this house. One time, John was working up on the roof deck when he felt the presence of his wife behind him. And then when he glanced behind him, he realized it wasn't his wife, but the figure of a man wearing white coveralls.
There was a man standing about 2 feet behind me as I painted, and he said to me, "What do you suppose you're doing here?" I said to him, "I'm painting my deck."
John was beside himself. He couldn't figure out who this figure was. Who was the man dressed in white coveralls?
And he turned and walked away. So I dashed down my stairs, ran to my front door, reached for it and pulled, and the door was locked. It was as if the fellow, the man was never there.
Some people might be surprised that John didn't seem that astonished by finding a man in white coveralls appearing on the rooftop of his house. After all, John's home is a very popular spot for tourists. His home is in every guidebook in the area. He eventually confessed this experience to a neighbor, who in turn revealed the story of the house. Apparently, there was a painter who was painting the deck roof and suffered a heart attack and died there. We do know there was a death there, and possibly a spirit remained.
Well, the Andretti House is a very eccentric place, deliberately so, designed by an artist. Artists are fantasy-prone almost by definition. Artists listen to emotion. Artists fantasize, use their imagination, blend it with reality to produce art. And so many artists are going to be much more sympathetic to the notion of ghosts than non-artists. So here you've got an eccentric house to begin with. I'm not sure exactly how the legend of the ghost began. It could either be some fantasy on the part of the artist mistaking other stimulation as being the ghost and then looking for a story to back it up and finding that someone had once died in the roof. Or it could be the knowledge of someone having died in the roof leading to speculation as to whether or not there's a ghost, and leading someone who has a good imagination to, again, interpret things in terms of a ghostly influence on otherwise normal events. But you put it all together, you've got an eccentric house, you've got something that starts to attract attention even from tourists, and a good ghost story certainly helps add to the eccentricity.
On another night, John and his wife, Susan, were awakened by their dogs barking. Susan got up thinking there might be somebody at the front door. As she opened the front door, she was shocked to see a young woman dressed in a white chiffon gown and barefoot.
She was standing on the other side of my glass door looking at me, and I was looking at her, and it was very, it wasn't really scary, but it was strange. And so I called for my husband, because I was a bit freaked out. So I called, and my husband was talking to her. She wouldn't respond. She just, stared at us.
The young lady refused to speak. Susan, knowing that something was wrong, encouraged her to come in, but she didn't. She closed the door behind her and went to phone the authorities to find out if anyone was missing. After she got off the phone, she was shocked to see the young girl walking throughout the house. Eventually, the young girl made her way to the rooftop stairs. The young girl had simply vanished in thin air.
She wasn't scary. She just seemed to want us to know she was there. It was all very strange.
Yeah, when you're dealing with a house that's painted all different kinds of colors, and there are all kinds of strange objects and so forth in the house, then it to some extent throws a person's normal perception off. You're dealing with new stimulation you're not used to. And again, if there's any hint that there's a ghost story associated with this, that's likely to make it more easy to misperceive things and come to interpret them in terms of some kind of ghostly presence.
One day while I was working, I thought I'd seen someone that was trying to take the tour of our home. She was dressed in white silken clothing, and I followed after her, and I could see the woman plainly. And when I followed up after her, she was gone.
The spirits are attracted to this home and the grounds because there's an energy of creativity happening here. Maybe one of the reasons why this young girl who appears in a white gown finds the need to enter the home. Sachs Fish and Chip restaurant in Keswick opened up in the 1950s. Since that time, it's become a very popular spot for locals arriving for dinner. However, now they have a new set of customers called ghosts.
I feel there's a huge crowd of people behind me. I've never really experienced this before. Perhaps with everyone talking and all the energy that we're giving off, it's drawing the spirits closer to us.
The night of the investigation, our psychic picked up about 14 different spirits here, I believe.
Carolyn was very close to her uncle, Eddie, who cared for her. And when he passed away, it's quite possible that he ended up remaining her guardian in the restaurant.
My parents purchased the property in March 6th of 1949, and when anything weird or unusual happened, we just kind of filed it in the Uncle Eddie category. Uncle Eddie passed away in 1969 when I was really little. Uncle Eddie came to live with us when I was about a year old, and he was I guess you'd call it Alzheimer's now. We didn't know what it was then, so my parents had him move in with us. And he used to take care of me when my parents were running the restaurant. So he was kind of like my built-in babysitter. He lived with us. And I remember being in my pajamas and the sun was coming up and he was sitting in his chair and he was like, it's okay, sweetie, I want you to go back to bed now. Everything's fine, everything will be great. You just go on back to bed now and I'll see you a little later. So I went back to bed, did what I was told, went back into bed and I heard a little bit of commotion out in the living room area a couple hours later. My mom came into my bedside and she knelt down and she said, honey, I just want you to stay in bed for a little bit because there's some men here and they've come to take Uncle Eddie away because Uncle Eddie died last night. It didn't bother me because I knew he was still here. And I still have this sense that, you know, he said everything was going to be okay, but I knew he was gone, but he wasn't.
Carolyn, the owner, who also works in the kitchen as a cook, has had a number of experiences. One of them being when she turns the gas stove on and then turns around, goes back to the stove later, the knob has been turned off.
There have been a few incidences in the kitchen with other staff members where they have had light objects tossed in their direction and have struck them that haven't fallen off a shelf or really seem to almost come out of nowhere.
Pots and pans and other objects have a tendency to move on their own. And Carolyn has witnessed this, felt the presence in this kitchen, and perhaps it might be her uncle, Eddie.
And it hasn't been until recently that we've really had a lot of people coming in and seeing different size people, different dressed people, children. It's been brought to my knowledge that it's not necessarily just Uncle Eddie doing these things. That's why they didn't always fit in with his personality type or his physical description.
One time, a psychic visited the restaurant and reported a number of spirits inhabiting the dwelling. For example, there's a little girl that's seen at the front entrance skipping by a table.
I felt the presence of a child around me, and I turned and looked. There was this young child, maybe about 7 years old, standing behind me. She seems to flit around from table to table. Anytime there's children here, she seems to be drawn to the children.
The little girl that's seen at the front of the restaurant also likes to climb up and sit on the counter. I wonder whose attention she's seeking.
The child is here. The child is sitting on that stool, watching, smiling. I can see her.
Well, when it comes to psychics, there's never been a case where a psychic who claims to have these special psychic abilities has been able to demonstrate them under conditions that rule out either misperception or fraud or whatever. So we should be very cautious about psychics even to begin with. But if a psychic walks into a room and claims to be seeing things here, there, and all over, people who are not very cautious may, in fact, take this as they might take eyewitness testimony. A psychic could look at anything and say anything, and some people would believe that. It's interesting, the old traditional used car dealer would tell people things, but people were naturally suspicious of used car dealers because they expected them to mislead them somewhat. Psychics earn their reputation by doing psychic things. The psychic has a vested interest in getting people around him or her to believe that they are psychic. And so one should, for that reason as well, be particularly cautious about people who claim to be psychics. In some sense, the psychic is perhaps the worst witness in the world because the psychic has something to prove, in a sense. The psychic is out to prove that he or she is psychic. That's his or her reputation. And so there's probably less credibility associated with that kind of report than there is with somebody who has nothing to prove.
At the moment, there's a very, very strong feeling of anger. I think there's more fear, but fear and anger can be combined. This entity here is not pleased with what's happening. I'm feeling very anxious that I want to get out of here. There's an oily feeling to my skin. It's very thick in that corner, and I really feel that there could be a danger in here.
One spirit that resides in the basement appears to be quite an evil person. Most of the employees working in the restaurant fear for themselves in terms of going down into this basement. That's a place they do not want to go.
My staff doesn't like going to the basement. Just more an overwhelming sense of a bad sense about the basement. I've had a few staff members know exactly what spot we're talking about on the floor, literally within like a 3x3 space. They're like, I know he's there because I walk through there, and it's just like takes your breath away. You feel cold or chilled. The hair on the back of your neck stands up. You just feel extremely uncomfortable, and you want to get away as soon as you possibly can.
The man downstairs is not happy, and he's been there for a long time. He's very, very angry, and I didn't feel comfortable with him at all.
Down in the basement, we had a couple of encounters. Something grabbed onto my pant leg, tugged 3 times. I just carried on, and about 30 seconds later, I felt a hand on my leg, and it squeezed 3 times. After that, I finished up what I was doing and went into the upstairs area.
If there's a lot of activity within a home or a building of some sort, happiness, sadness, anxiety, whatever, the energy lingers. And there must be something here that pulls the entities or the spirits or the energy to this spot. And they're waiting to pass on. I don't know. Waiting to be reincarnated. I don't know. That's the big question.
We do know that Uncle Eddie is probably in the kitchen with Carolyn. We don't know who is in the basement. That presence is unexplained. And we also know that perhaps the restaurant, there was something there before that restaurant. We don't know what it was, what had happened there, and it remains unexplained.